Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another YouTube live with Shoaib, Ahmed, Malik. At least I got it right this time. How
Assalamualaikum,
you
bro.
doing, bro? Assalamu alaikum.
Alhamdulillah, you okay?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good, man. You seem very busy with so many videos online.
Yeah, well, I'm under lockdown, so I've actually you gave me some really good advice about having a schedule. So since I started having a schedule, I've just become a lot more productive because I know, okay, so I need to do this, this, and this every day. Or else what you end up doing is basically answering lots of questions on social media, which what I've started to do now is I'm ignoring all of the requests I get for questions because I started to realize that it's the same questions. And if I just do that, I'll literally not be able to do anything else. So WhatsApp messages, emails, Facebook messages, random messages that I get, brother, how do you explain this? I'm just like, I cut it out now.
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah, no,
handle
I
it.
think it's an amazing opportunity to just like refine your practice, your iman. It's
Yep.
really a hot zone for that, man.
Definitely, definitely. And one of the blessings of Allah is that we've gone into this particular issue, this crisis with Iman, right? Going back to a time where we were probably non-practicing, we'd be freaking out right now. We'd be like, what the heck? My life, I can't go out, well, my business, my work, So, that's been a big blessing. So how have you been? What have you been up to?
Oh man, just been like acing through books and materials. There's some days that I just kind of have a writer's block, or just I feel like doing nothing because of you just get bored by doing the same activity again and again. But alhamdulillah, I've been doing well. I mean, finishing a few books every week, finishing a few articles, trying to get my own work under production. So things are looking very, very well. The key challenge, I think, for me, if anything, is just trying to keep my son engaged. That's the only kind of difficulty that I have at home. Apart from that, I think overall it's been a very, very good experience. I mean, as a family, we've gotten closer. So we do some family activities together. We have food together now, because usually when I'm in the office, I have a snack at the uni, and yeah, everything is now synchronized. And I think my wife, I think, put it best. She says that the world is having a break from us because we take such a tax on the world.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way of
You know?
putting it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So, alhamdulillah.
It's interesting you said about the family dinner because I myself, I had the same issue that I wasn't really having family dinners, right? I was eating on my own, waking up at different times and whatnot, going off to different places to travel. And what happened with, what's it called, this lockdown is you get to spend time with your family and, you get to do things you never normally get to do. So it's been a big blessing.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, man. Alhamdulillah. I personally felt there was a lot of positivity in just, being shut down in your house and just having that time together.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so let's get started with this, right? So let's do a quick introduction to the topic. Methodological naturalism, which Shoaib Bhai will actually define. Why we're discussing it is it's linked to biological evolution and it's generally linked to science. And in a way, it's also linked to Islamic epistemology, right? I mean, what can we allow, and what are the problems with allowing certain things or disallowing certain things? So, just as a sort of crash course, right? A crash course of understanding of what it is, what's at stake before we speak about its validity. Could you please just give us a explanation?
Sure. So I think we need to kind of compare and contrast two different positions, right? So one is philosophical naturalism, and one is methodological naturalism, and these are the two different and distinctive positions in which there's like a battlefield. The heat between philosophical and methodological naturalism is pretty much the debate between theism and atheism. So that's the rivalry there. And the debate over methodological naturalism is fundamentally a debate between people like theistic evolutionists versus intelligent design groups, and I'll kind of unpack that. So philosophical naturalism is primarily a metaphysical position in nature. What that means is that it's stipulating how the world ought to be, or what is contained in the world. It's an ontological position, which simply says that nature is all there is. That means God is ruled out, de facto, end of. Methodological naturalism, by contrast, is not a strong claim as philosophical naturalism is. All it says is that when it comes to science, science best describes what the natural world is like. And it has a few presumptions underneath it, right? But it makes no claims about the totality of reality. So it's pretty much silent on the question of whether there are things like God, angels, devils, etc. So because these are supernatural entities. So that's the kind of juxtaposition that we need to have, right? Now, philosophical naturalism, by and large, is adopted by atheists because they don't believe anything beyond, the natural world. Though there are exceptions. For example, Raymond Tallis, he's an atheist, but he's a dualist, for instance. He doesn't believe that nature is all there is. Very interestingly. So his book called sorry?
Neuromania?
Neuromania, yeah, he discusses in several works of his. So he would be an exception to this rule. And now philosophical naturalism, methodological naturalism is a position that is applicable to both atheists and theists, because it's how you practice science and what you believe the territory of science is. Now, the reason why the question of methodological naturalism is there, even for theists, is recently because of the whole discussion between theistic evolution and intelligent design. Now, intelligent design advocates say that there is enough complexity, enough design observable in the universe through which we can posit a designer. This is their narrative, right? And because now for them, therefore, methodological naturalism is an obstacle to making that point. That's why there's been a lot of criticism of methodological naturalism in their works. And that's why it's of great concern and of serious interest for any practicing believer who wants to entertain what kind of naturalism should we really entail. Now, I want to make sure that we dissociate naturalism in terms of its psychological connotation. So when we remember that poll that we had on Facebook in the Islam Science and Philosophy group, mashallah, we had a very healthy response. So I actually put this out in a poll. We had, I think, over 100 people responding. I think that's the largest poll that I've seen in that group. And I asked, should Muslims adopt methodological naturalism? About 60% said yes. About 30% said no. And then the remaining 10%, I think, said some other responses. So most Muslims, at least in that group, and given the people who responded, believe that methodological naturalism should be adopted by Muslims. Now, the question here, however, is, and one of the things I noticed in the comments when people were doing the poll, is that they immediately think that naturalism kind of psychologically means God is out of the equations. So I think we have to avoid that the connotation of naturalism is not necessarily a dirty word. Methodological naturalism is an epistemic attitude towards how you do scientific practice, and we need to make sure that is crystal clear. It says nothing of metaphysics, it says nothing of ontology, and some people make the critique that it has an implicit bias towards naturalism. Not necessarily so. It's an implicit bias towards naturalism within the rubric of science. That's all it's trying to establish. So that, in a nutshell, is the field, and I think that's why this conversation is very important to have by Muslims.
Absolutely, and I just wanted to add that I think this is a crucial point, because where you start off with, if you start off with the assumption of methodological naturalism, or if you start off with the assumption that no, we will allow some sort of non-natural explanation, some intelligent design, that will totally color all the rest of the data that's coming in from whatever subfield of biology. Another point I just wanted to share is I was very strongly in favor of methodological naturalism. And I had a conversation with Usman on this, Usman Ali. And
by the way, I think you should put his video down there, because it might be of interest to some of the people who are watching this.
Yeah. I'll actually do that. I think I may have uploaded it already on this channel. I think I've already.
Okay, good.
So he changed my mind on this, right? He was a big reason for me. Well, I didn't change my mind. I basically became doubtful that methodological naturalism is the best thing. So one of the things that made me doubt was that even if it's the case that within the rubric of science, just within that domain, we're using this as a working assumption, it's not a position. Even though that's philosophically coherent for a Muslim to do that, sociologically, it just seems like God is a redundant explanation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Also, from a psychological perspective, people, and I started to realize this is a huge mistake I made because I kept making the distinction between philosophical naturalism and methodological naturalism. But then I started to think about it, and I thought the vast majority of people, they'll never realize this distinction, because the vast majority of people, we won't be able to change their minds about the philosophy of science, and most people will have a pop understanding of science, even a Popperian understanding, right? They'll always have that because, you know, people, the public is always years behind academia. So purely from a point of view of consequences, right? Mm-hmm. I was thinking it's perhaps detrimental to faith, and that's made me now sort of agnostic about whether we should use methodological naturalism or we shouldn't. But let me give you a reason why I think, and I used to think strongly before that we have to stick to it. And
yeah, I was going to ask you that. What was your reason? So I want you to walk us through your journey.
Yeah. So I am of the view that theological battles do not need to happen within the scientific lab, the universities, and all these places.
Okay. Yeah.
Muslims are so far behind. We need to go right at the forefront of science. Dr. Farid Khan, who I think I've mentioned to you before, I may not have. So he's a Cambridge academic. He's a research associate at the university, and he's a genius, right, from an evolutionary biology point of view. And he said something really powerful to me. He said Muslims should be the ones who discover the next penicillin. He doesn't give a flying horse. He doesn't care about the whole discussion of whether it's true or not. For him, assume it as a working paradigm, produce the best you can. Now, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, if we give out a narrative to the Muslim students, similar to the ID narrative in America, Muslim students, rather than accepting as a working model, they'll either fall into a type of Harun Yahya creationism or intelligent design, which I know is totally different. I mean, they're totally different, but they won't be productive as scientists, which is what I want Muslims to be. And I don't want there to be Muslim students walking out of UCL University because they're teaching anthropology, right? It's embarrassing. This is actually quite pathetic, yeah? Mm-hmm. And so I want the Muslim community to be at the forefront of science and to get them involved in these petty issues, which is about realism, instrumentalism, working assumptions, these things. It's not important. So that's why I was strongly in favor of saying, take it as a working method and go ahead. Even my dissertation, which inshallah soon I'm going to try and publish, and you recommended that I do, and that really gave me a lot of confidence. So
I think it's excellent. I think you definitely need to publish.
My dissertation is a strong defense of Darwinism to be used as a working model, and it's a debunking, if you want to call it, of rival evolutionary ideas, right? Which is the exact opposite of what you would expect a Muslim to do. But for me, it's pragmatic, because even within the field, I think there's no point trying to get into arguments about Darwinism. I think what we could do is we could actually take it as a working model. The past history is kind of irrelevant, right, to what we're doing today, and just exceed in it. So that's why I'm strongly in favor, and that's why I'm agnostic. I'm not here or there. I see pros and cons everywhere. But one more small thing I wanted to add, because obviously your thoughts on this are a lot more evolved than mine. So now I'm doing a weighing up in my brain. I'm looking at the sociological impact on Iman by people if they confuse methodological naturalism, philosophical naturalism. Mm-hmm. And then I'm weighing it up with another sociological weight, if you want to call it, which is, what if getting Muslims involved in these petty disputes will make Muslims less productive, which then sociologically will add to, again, Muslims and Islam, they haven't done anything in centuries, right? So at the moment, it's a battle with the same domain, right? It's basically the sociological impact on society.
Okay, so just to kind of make sure that I've understood you, right? So you're arguing by consequence, in the sense that if Muslims adopt methodological naturalism, so that's the conditional, right? Then it possibly or potentially leads to Muslims adopting philosophical naturalism. That's one concern you had, right? Okay, and I think you have a secondary concern as well, in that if Muslims adopt methodological naturalism, you believe that it can pull them away from the sciences. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yes.
So, okay, so the first one I understood, the first argument I understood that, but the second one didn't quite follow. So how did you link that if Muslims adopt methodological naturalism, it will make them lazy scientists, I think, or pull them away from science? How does that argument work?
So the first point that I made is if they understand, they link. Oh yeah, sorry. Maybe I articulated it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically the same point that I'm saying, that they basically will start seeing, either they'll go towards philosophical naturalism, or they'll start to believe that God as an explanation is simply superfluous, right?
Right.
Which
okay.
Same point. Yeah.
Okay.
So my point, which I was making on the other side, is if they, just as a logical link to this other point, is if they do accept methodological naturalism, Muslims, I have a belief that because they won't be involved in these petty side issues, more Muslims are going to be more likely to be productive within the sciences, right? Mm-hmm. So that's an assumption, obviously.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So right. Okay. So I get now where you're coming from. Now, would you say? So I have two questions to ask. Right. I'm loving this back and forth. By the way, this is really good. So I have two questions. Number one. So do you think that there's an intrinsic problem with methodological naturalism, or is it simply due to the way that they're taught? That's one thing. So, and if it's the way that they're taught, then shouldn't we reform our education system so that they can still be aware of these? By the way, when you say petty issues, I'm assuming you're talking about philosophy of science, correct? Yeah. So if once they're aware of some of these nuances, wouldn't that actually make them better scientists, because they can even understand the limitations of science and be able to progress within their fields? So these are the kind of questions I have for you.
Yeah. So I just remember the second one, but remind me what the first question was.
So the first question, man, I have very bad short-term memory. So the point that I was making is that, do you think that it's intrinsically bad to occupy methodological naturalism, or is simply because of the result of the education that is bad?
So I don't think there's anything wrong with it intrinsically.
Okay.
I'm of the belief, and I could be totally wrong here, but I'm of the belief that the early Muslims, they may not have called it that, but I really think that's what they were adopting, right? Mm-hmm. And
when you mean early, so just to be clear, so you mean early, you mean medieval scholars, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay.
I mean, we don't really have a way of accessing their brains. They were just doing the science.
Yeah.
But you see, for example, when you look at the narration of the Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet said, "Seek medicine, O servants of Allah, for Allah has not sent down a disease for that which He sent down a cure." So I can see a Muslim scientist having the background metaphysics that everything happens because of Allah, but practically, and I know this sounds a bit blasphemous, but practically he's acting like an atheist from a pragmatic point of view. And that reminds me of tawakkul, because you have trust in Allah in a way that you just believe Allah will do it. But your own actions are, you do it as you work just as hard as an atheist would. Do you see? So that's how I see. I mean, I've heard the arguments that there's some internal problem with accepting methodological naturalism, and I just don't see it. And I don't think that like you said, if it was taught correctly and people knew this stuff, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It'd be a no-brainer for me.
Right. Okay. So So if that is the case, then so let's just say I'm playing devil's advocate here, right? Let's just say that methodological naturalism is bad. Let's just say we don't want to adopt that. That's not the position Muslims should adopt. What is the alternative?
For what reason? For what reason?
So no, so you're saying that you become agnostic about methodological naturalism. So that means
Yeah.
that you have a few reservations
Ah.
about it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm saying keeping in mind your sociological trajectories and consequences, keeping all of that in mind, which I completely understand and I respect that. But then what is the alternative? What is the alternative that will still make them good scientists and all of that? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah. So this is again something I'm a bit confused about, because I've even heard ID proponents say ID as a theory of the idea that God is intervening and God is creating irreducible complexity and all the rest.
Yeah.
They themselves, some of them, have said it's at the moment so early, it's not even applicable. And I've heard some of them say this.
Sorry.
Right?
When you mean it's so early, I didn't quite get that. Early for what?
As in, how would it work practically? They haven't actually thought about it. They've given it a label ID, right? But how will it actually work? So, for example, at what point will you say, okay, we know that this particular organism, it couldn't have come around by gradual, increments. At this point, we know that it was instant creation or whatever it is. And it seems like, and again, with my understanding of their point, I'm just going by popular stuff that they say. I mean, I haven't studied it to the level that Usman has. Maybe he can defend it a lot better than I do. But they don't really give you a solid answer of how it will work practically. So say today, ID takes over the world in terms of
science, let's just say, yeah. Okay.
Again, I could make a straw man here, and I'm willing to say I'm sorry for that, but it seems like they'll still be pretty much applying methodological naturalism, but just saying God now and again. That's what I think. I can't see how it's like, for example, in science, let's stick with the words of Richard Lewontin, right? So Richard Lewontin says, regardless of how counterintuitive something sounds, regardless of the just so stories, regardless of how difficult it is to conceptualize, everything has to have a naturalistic explanation, right? That is very clear. You can work with that. But then if you have, say, the same thing being done by ID proponent, at what point do we stop using physical causation, right? And then we say, no, this thing is irreducibly complex, right? Or at this point, this species was created. Like, I'm finding it hard to see how it would be applied.
Right.
Maybe
okay.
I won't get up enough about it.
Right. Okay. So let me just kind of summarize to make sure that I've understood you, right? So you're saying that given, let's just say ID is true, in practice, though, it still seems like they'd be adopting methodological naturalism. That's what you're saying, right? Yeah. So
although like I said, my
provisionally.
Yeah, but I just wanted to add something, which is that I haven't read ID stuff, right? And I literally only a few months ago, I made that video in which I said I've done a sort of U-turn from the perspective I no longer challenge ID. So I haven't read any of their literature, so I'm completely ignorant of that, right? So I could be making loads of mistakes right now. But this
I respect that. I don't think there's anything incorrect that you said, bro. I'm just trying to tweak out the points so that we can kind of focus on.
No, but I can give the impression as if I really know ID, but I don't. That's why I just want to.
Right. Okay. So I think that let's just put ID for aside, because that makes the conversation a little bit more complex, right? Unnecessarily for now. Let's just say as Muslims, right, we believe that there are a couple of things that is not in the purview of science, i.e. things that don't belong to the natural world. Primarily related to us is the soul. That's something that we can, I think, all agree on, right? Now, because of that, we would definitely have an issue in terms of trying to understand the human makeup completely through a physical lens. So we can, by completely, I mean, we believe that the physical world will exhaustively tell us about the human makeup. This is where we kind of won't agree with that, because we believe variations of dualism, it will depend from one thinker to another, but we believe in some kind of ontological dualism where you have the material body here, and then you have the spiritual makeup that cannot be reduced to matter.
Oh, okay.
Right?
So can I just add something to that?
Yeah.
Would that really be a problem for Islam, though? As like, if we were to do, even if we had a complete free reign, right?
Yeah.
That would be assuming that all the Muslims happen to be scientific realists.
Yeah. Oh no. What I simply mean by that is that from a metaphysical point of view, we know where scientific gaps are going to be. That's it. We definitely can apply, psychological models.
Yeah.
We can apply everything. We can take Freud. We can take whoever we wish, whatever is the latest science, and apply it. No problem, right? But we're saying, can it give us an exhaustive understanding of human psychology through a physical lens? Not necessarily. We take the model and understand its implications through it, but that's it. But in terms of its metaphysically, we don't believe it's exhaustive, because there's a concept in Islam called Haqiqat al-Insan. So Imam Razi, Ghazali, they all adopted this, right? Where the essence of man is the spirit, the soul, not the physiological makeup, right? So the physical makeup, sorry. So that is where we can kind of understand from a metaphysical point of view what we need to flush out scientifically and what we can apply scientifically on the ground, right? So that should be crystal clear. Now, for me, methodological naturalism, and so I'm of the opinion that methodological naturalism should be the default position, and I'm saying this both as a scientist and somebody coming from a theological background. I say this from two angles. That so I may be at odds with Usman. Usman may have a different opinion to me. I think he does have a different opinion to me. Yeah, so the reason why I believe it should be the default stance is because I think that from a pragmatic point of view, every discipline has a scope and an area designated for what it's supposed to do, right? So for example, I'm not going to take the tools and techniques of mathematics and do art with them. Nor am I going to take the tools and techniques of art and apply it to mathematics. You will have a complete conflation of results here and methodologies. It's going to be completely haphazardous. So the same way, science is a designated study of the natural world, right? And as a result of that, we are looking to nature for explanation of certain things. And this includes things like forces, gravity, electromagnetic quarks, whatever have you, right? Now, some may argue, so there's a couple of things. Now, when I was going through that poll that I mentioned to you about earlier, I saw several reasons. That's why I asked people for those reasons so I can kind of work through them systematically. One of them was that it leads to philosophical naturalism. So this is something that you mentioned as well. So in this regard, I think it's important that this is a matter of education, not a matter of something that's inherently or intrinsically problematic with methodological naturalism. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no, right?
So
yes, I would agree exactly that it's not a if in the world, like in economics they have perfect demand, perfect supply. If in the world there was perfect information, right? Yeah. I would totally say let's not even have this conversation about methodology.
Yeah. Okay. So in an ideal society, this would not even be a problem for us, assuming that education reform.
I believe practically it's impossible to do that.
Agreed. I agree with you. I'm with you on that page. Okay, fine. So, but we're talking about conceptually here. That the methodological does not necessarily entail philosophical naturalism. That is a conceptual point. Okay, fellas, this point is not a problem.
Okay, I just want to pick your brains on. Not only is it the case that methodological naturalism doesn't lead to philosophical naturalism, but methodological naturalism, in of itself, as a system, it doesn't. There isn't anything in Islam that forces us to say no. You have to You have to use a system that has. Within science, some form of supernatural explanations. I think even from Islam, there's no pressure. That's my belief.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to get to that point. That the reason what's guiding my principle in adopting methodological naturalism, and there are two divisions that we need to kind of carve out even here. There's a further division between intrinsic methodological naturalism versus provisional methodological naturalism. So we'll get to that in a second. But my motivation and my guiding principle is that I believe that there's a book called Classification of Knowledge by Usman Bakr. It's a book that was published by Cambridge Tech Society, as far as I remember, and in 1992. And this book reviews the hierarchy of knowledge of three different scholars: Ghazali, Avicenna, and Suhrawardi. as far as I remember, right? And for me, the reason I am trying to understand why they put so much effort into these schemes, these epistemic schemes, and the reason seems to be very clear. They wanted to show how disciplines are divided and what is the territory of each discipline, okay? So that there is no cross manipulation of one territory to another. So I'm not going to apply mathematics into metaphysics, because you cannot necessarily get mathematical certainty in metaphysical certainties, and vice versa, right? So that for me is my guiding principle. And for me, it seems abundantly clear that for them, science is the study of regularity in nature. That's what it seems to be the case, that science is the study of regularity in nature. Now, coming back to that poll, the second biggest reason on why people seem to have disagreed with methodological naturalism is miracles, which is the heart of the debate here. I think that's one of the main principles of the debate here, right? So they would say that when miracles occur, well, science will not accept that. I agree. It is not in the purview of science to accept miracles, because by definition, it is the study of cause and effect, of regularities, sunnatullah, something that God habituates. So what do you think?
Yeah, you see, I have if somebody was to use that argument on me, I have other reasons to disagree with methodological naturalism. But if someone is to use a miracle argument, I would simply say that was not the purpose of the miracle. Who said that the miracles have to be verified through science? Yeah, they're two different things going past each other. I don't know why people bring that up. Our belief in miracles is no way linked to our scientific investigations.
I agree with that, because miracles are, in pretty much in the purview of science, miracles don't exist. And I as a scientist, I agree with that. I prefer not having that, because I personally believe that there are these regularities there. Now, what are the explanations of those regularities? That's when we enter metaphysics. That is a metaphysical discussion now, right? So it is for this reason I think it's very important to bring up Yas al-Qadi. Okay, the reason why I appreciate Yas al-Qadi a lot. Just 1 second, my son is here. Juju, what do you want, Ubu? Okay, wait, sorry. So so Yas al-Qadi, his solution to the compatibility, quote unquote, between Islam and evolution, for me, as somebody who's looked into this intensively now for 3-4 years, I believe it's a remarkable solution. I personally think it's brilliant, really. I don't necessarily agree with him, but I think it's a brilliant solution in the spectrum of opinions that exist out there. Him and Salman al-Jalajal are the best in my humble opinion. So Yas al-Qadi says simply that from a Quran, from an Islamic point of view, we believe that Adam alayhi salam was created from nothing in heaven and descended on earth miraculously. So that means he had no prior physical creation with parents, right? Now, if you take that, now all he simply says that the physiology or the biology of Adam alayhi salam and the humans that followed afterwards had all the biological genetic makeup that is expected and demanded of evolution. So therefore, from a scientific perspective, it seems like a seamless continuation, a transition, which is fine. And because it's not in the purview of science to assess miracles. And now for me, I think that that's perfect, because from a metaphysical point of view, we agree in miracles. We have no problems with that. But from a scientific perspective, miracles are out of the equation. So from that point of view, I think that methodological naturalism is fine to assume that, because it is simply the study of regularity. So up to this point, what do you think?
I completely see his point, and I see how it's consistent and coherent, right?
Yeah. From both sides. It's coherent from both sides.
Totally, right? I mean, I have no issues with that. But the conversation going that far back, for me, is irrelevant. Yeah. And I often say this. I say, the phylogenetic history of mankind and all the rest, I mean, it's completely irrelevant to what evolutionary biologists are doing today. For example, the most important people in the world today, right now, are not doctors, not engineers, not philosophers, are virologists, right? Now, for them, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant about if somebody makes up a particular phylogenetic tree or of a different type of tree.
Yeah.
Who cares? So from a practical point of view,
from a what point of view? Sorry?
From a practical point of view.
Practical point of view.
Like right now, like I don't even understand why we need to go back that far. And okay, maybe we have to move that thing, because there is, like I'm not sure if Yasakati says this, but he's obviously saying that there was a creation in heaven and then came down. There's others who are going to say, well, where is the absolute proof for that in the Quran and Sunnah?
Sure. To be clear here, I'm not saying that he said. He says that's the likeliest opinion based on the strongest indications. That's the only thing I think he can say. Yeah. Okay.
Basically, there's other possibilities too.
Yeah.
I don't entertain any of these discussions. For me, what's important is right now the application of methodological naturalism.
Sure.
Now, so I'm kind of like Asadullah Ali, right? I'm kind of a pragmatist. Yeah? I'm not really. I don't really care about the past. I said this in a live YouTube stream yesterday. I said, if all the religious people on earth today, they all accept universal common ancestry, we would still be facing the same issue. Because the issue is fundamentally not about some historical event. The issue is about philosophical naturalism, methodological naturalism, one leading to the other in the confusion. For me, that's the most important thing.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add one more thing about the what's the other point that you said just before the Yasakadi thing?
About methodological naturalism and miracles. We're talking about miracles in general.
Miracles, yeah. It's kind of like this. When Allah says in the Quran that He created the universe and people translate it as the universe is expanding, right? If you look at why people keep doing those sort of mistakes, why they keep basically saying, oh, okay, so basically that's a scientific miracle, that's this, that's that. How you can nip it in the bud is by teaching them the very purpose of these verses is the worship of Allah. The Quran came as a manual not to give you scientific information at all. It came there to tell you how to worship Allah. Now let's look at miracles. The purpose of the miracles was to show Allah's power. To show Allah's might, to show Allah's, intervention in the world. Why we bring up the discussions of science and miracles, it's like water and oil. I just don't even go into those discussions. I'm like, who cares? Like, for example, the virgin birth, right? Imagine if I'm a university professor and I get, I get assigned at some university, and I'm sitting in front of some students who are Muslim, some students who are non-Muslim, and we're talking about, in biology, this is how children are conceived and X, Y, Z. And then I just happen to make a statement that, look, guys, I'm teaching this stuff, but let me just make it clear. I do believe in miracles, and I do believe that once in history, this did not happen, right? I can't agree with this scientific, all you guys coming with it. It would be so dumb for me to do that. Because the purpose of that action which Allah did was not for me to talk 1400 years ago in a class and speak to people about how this is a problem for us in terms of uniformity of nature. That was a miracle that happened at that time, and we accept it to be literally true. Today, we know that's how children are born. So it's irrelevant to bring those two things together. So I often get asked about my views about, was Adam al-Islam created on earth? Was he created in heaven? Is human chimp ancestry possible under certain views? Is it possible Adam al-Islam's soul came down? And even scholars, as you know, they get into deep discussions about this. And I literally don't have it, because for me, it's like it doesn't make any sense. I don't even understand why the conversation begins. I appreciate, I'm not saying I'm right and they're wrong, but I can't see the point of having these conversations.
Right. Okay. So I think this comes back to the point of education, because people don't have the know-how and the complexities of the debate that other scholars have. For them, and bear in mind, we talked about not being able to see the distinction between methodological and philosophical naturalism. It seems as an apparent conflict all the time. That's why. So when I at least first started looking into Islam and evolution, for me, I was quite flabbergasted, because I thought there was a conflict. So I immediately ran into the first saving boat that I saw, which was intelligent design. I was an advocate of intelligent design until I started researching, and I started distancing myself from their thoughts. Now, the point of miracles comes back to this point, in that pragmatically you're correct. It shouldn't make a difference to your overall worldview. I agree with you. But the key thing here is that from a worldview perspective, where do you fit it? That's the point. Is it a metaphysical principle or is it a scientific one? If it's a metaphysical principle, khalas, it's outside of the purview of science. And that's why, yeah. Sorry.
So I don't mean to be in simplifying the issue, but it kind of reminds me of, okay, so say if I'm a shop owner, right? I'm a shop owner, and there's lots of people coming into my shop. 99.999% of my customers, they actually don't steal, right?
Okay.
And I have an atmosphere where everybody's happy and people are walking in, there's no security checks, nothing's going on. Say I find out in a year that there's 1 million customers that walk in and out of my store, but one person stole. Based on that one person that stole, I decide to employ stringent security measures throughout the whole store for the entire duration of the year.
Yeah.
And everybody's affected by that. But the thing is, that was one thing that happened, and we know that if you look at the overall picture, it's going to be more detrimental to basically put all these security issues. It's going to reduce your sales and whatnot. Yeah. So miracles are things that happened in the past, and they're over and done with, right? From a purely pragmatic point of view, it wouldn't make sense for a store owner to change his entire operating system based upon one event, right? And which may reoccur. But with miracles, it's not like it's going to happen tomorrow, like, we're going to have another virgin birth. It's just something which happened historically. We metaphysically accept it and khalas. But today, in terms of science, we just carry on. We just basically, for me, the most important thing is, if Muslims stay behind in science, I believe this will lead more people to apostasies. I believe this will lead more people to basically say that Islam is irrelevant in the 21st century, and more people will turn to atheism, more people will, so a lot of people, I mean, I've even had here people in Pakistan say to me, well, my view, indirectly, they were trying to say to me that my view is kind of like feeding scientism, because it's like, we have to be the best, yeah? Well, practically, the Prophet ﷺ, he could have sent out anybody to go and speak to people about Islam. He chose the most handsome, right? And he chose the people who are the most eloquent. Now, eloquence and handsomeness has nothing to do with truth. Likewise, the truth of Islam is not linked to its scientific progress, but it does have a sociological impact on people. Yeah. Right? So for me, these miracles, I understand you and I get you with these types of discussions, but it reminds me of the discussion about causality. Yeah. About Imam Ghazali's view, which some people are still discussing today.
Yeah, of course.
And I literally shut down those conversations. I'm like, even Imam Ghazali never let that get in the way of his science. Yeah. It was something in the background.
So like I said, so I think from a pragmatic lens, absolutely, I agree with you 100%. But remember, I'm not necessarily saying this from a pragmatic point of view. I'm saying completely from a conceptual point of view, that in order to draw the lines between science and metaphysics, I think is very important. And I think that's the reason why people like Ghazali got never affected by these kinds of things, because he knew where to draw the line. Now, this is where I think we need to introduce just one more division, so that, because I know we've already had several divisions, but just one more division between intrinsic methodological naturalism versus provisional methodological naturalism. So this is something that's been developed, I think, by Martin Baudry, and I think by what's the other name? I forgot the author, Eugenie Scott, probably. Not Eugenie Scott, somebody else, but Martin Baudry, I think he's the one who developed this. Now, intrinsic methodological naturalism, it simply says that intrinsically, by definition, it is not in the purview of science's method to go beyond nature. So it's an intrinsic component to it, right? Whereas provisional is simply based on our experiences and based on how much success science has had, we should adopt methodological naturalism because supernatural explanations do not seem to add anything to the equations. That's provisional. Now, for me, I believe that the latter is not necessarily correct, because as I've understood it, stick to the focus of each discipline. It is not in the job of science. So for example, let me give you a clear example. There was a very famous physicist, or not a famous one, but a physicist from Pakistan who made a plan, a national budget plan, to maybe if we can create a weapon by analyzing jinn and using their powers for nuclear warfare. This is when somebody goes outside of the purview of science, goes into metaphysics and tries to take it into a physical boundary, right? So what I'm trying to say is that it's in the purview of science to strictly remain within the scientific box. That's methodological naturalism, i.e. intrinsic methodological naturalism. The moment that we talk about anything else when it comes to miracles, khalas, we have left science. We have left science. Now, somebody once asked me, well, aren't miracles natural phenomena? So for example, the sea, evolved and all of that, right? So it departed into two ways. The snake was converted from a staff, right? Aren't these natural phenomena? Yes. But them being natural does not, them being physical manifestations does not eliminate them from being supernatural manifestations. Everything we believe is supernatural in the sense that God is everywhere all the time controlling these things. But regularity is a feature that science presupposes. Remember, we talked about this in our last one, that science presupposes uniformal regularity in time and space. The moment we revoke those, we are no longer doing science. That is not science anymore. So that is why, for me, I believe that intrinsically we should adopt IMN, intrinsic methodological naturalism. So, and this is my opinion, both as somebody doing theology and somebody doing science. I believe that that is the safest position for Muslims to be in. That's wallahu alam, but I know there's going to be disagreements here. But that is my personal opinion on the matter.
So, intrinsic methodological naturalism.
Yeah.
And the other one that you said was
provisional or pragmatic methodological naturalism.
Pragmatic, right?
Yeah. So, to give you an idea here, provisional or pragmatic simply says that we resort to natural explanations within science because they seem to have done the best in terms of explaining things. As we have done more and more science, our understanding of the world expanded, and supernatural explanations have receded into the background. So for me, but it leaves open the possibility that maybe tomorrow there might be a miracle or a new event or something that we may be able to understand, whatever. Now, for me, that is more of a skeptical or more of a worrisome position, mainly because when you blur that line between science and metaphysics, I think that's when you kind of create this confusion, like that professor who wanted to look into jinn, commercializing them for warfare.
So it makes total sense, right? So you get the intrinsic and you have the provisional, right?
Yeah.
Problem with the provisional, I just
off the bat.
Yeah. It sort of kills the scientific spirit because there's many times we look at a problem and we're like, that ain't gonna get solved, yeah, and it does eventually. Now, I'm not saying all problems are going to be solved like that, but there are times where scientists are literally against a brick wall, and it's their persistence. Like, for example, junk DNA, right? Junk DNA was junk, and it just had nothing of value. And when I was doing my dissertation, there's a lot of popular information about junk DNA, but I really had to look into it. And I started to realize, oh my God, like if scientists gave up and just assumed this was junk, right? There's so much information related to diabetes, blood pressure, all these other things that we've now discovered. And that information was of great epistemic value, which obviously had non-epistemic consequences as well. So imagine if, obviously it's not the same problem, but we're facing a particular issue. And then it's like, okay, we're applying provisional methodological naturalism. Okay, let's just stop now. We have to bring in something, yeah? So it was God's intent. It was God's intent to have this junk DNA, which doesn't make sense, but I'm just giving an example, right?
Yeah.
When you bring in something like that, then it stops the possibilities.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
But there is one other thing which has made me doubtful about this, yeah? So as part of my dissertation, I also had to look at the epistemic and non-epistemic consequences of Darwinian thought on evolutionary psychology.
So when you mean non-epistemic, you mean metaphysical, I'm guessing?
No. Non-epistemic, I mean that, for example, so I was looking at two rival models: evolutionary factors and the traditional adaptationism, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So basically, by epistemic, I mean that once they discovered that junk wasn't totally junk, it opened up the epistemic treasure trove, right? That's what I mean. I don't mean metaphysics. I just mean more leads, essentially. Non-epistemic consequences, I mean that for, that we know how to cure certain diseases and whatnot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a worry when it comes to evolutionary psychology, and that worry is, we know deep down that obviously we're physical, and we have a certain chemical composition and certain chemicals. When we have a deficiency of them, we have all that science stuff sorted out. However, if we stick to intrinsic methodological naturalism, and then we stick with the idea, although there's a lot of dispute, that our brain was shaped by selection, right? Mm-hmm. You'd have different ways of treatment for depression and these other types of things, mm-hmm. than you would do if there was some sort of provisional methodological naturalism. We said, hang on a second. When it comes to the brain and why it's works the way it particularly it does, or whatever, or if you think there's a particular maladaptation in, the real issue is that it wasn't actually designed by selection. It was actually designed by God for us mm-hmm. to recognize him. And then that will have a non-epistemic consequence on the type of medicines and the type of treatments which are actually given. So that's off the bat. I haven't really thought about it much, but that's just something that came to mind.
Right. Okay. So I think this is referring back to what I said earlier, so that we use our metaphysics to flush out what we can and cannot do within science. So metaphysically, once we believe that there's a soul, right? So we believe that soul has certain logical properties, the mental properties, what have you, etc. Right? We know that there are certain things that science cannot do by definition. Can we entertain them for the sake of the model being applicable? Of course. You take the paradigm, apply it as far as you can. That is as far as science can go. But I don't believe that we can necessarily reduce everything to nature or to science because of our metaphysics. That's the point. Once you establish the boundary, you know how far your models can go. That's the point, right? Now, just to show you how, just to show you the kind of ways where I feel ID kind of fails. This is just one way. I'm not saying that ID is a failure. I'm just saying that ID for me is not the best option out there, right? Now, for me, so you know about the whole whale, right? So we had Pachycetus, and then from Pachycetus, we had the modern whale. Now, I think it was Douglas Axe who wrote about this. Or who mentioned this in one of his videos, where he simply states that the mutation rate was too fast in the given time for that evolution to have occurred, right? I think it was about 10 to 20 million years, if I'm not mistaken. So whoever's watching, please don't quote me on the exact numbers, but around that much range, right? Now, that is too fast. Right, so therefore, they pretty much say this, that because it's too fast, it could not have happened through natural selection. Therefore, we have to resort to an intelligent designer who kind of tweaked this. 1 second, yes. Okay, Jonah, just give me a couple of minutes. Daddy's just talking to someone. Sorry, guys. Okay, so coming back to my point. So they say that because it's too fast from a natural selection point of view, we have to resort to an intelligent designer. Now, the problem here is, and this is generally, I think, why we shouldn't be so quick to jump to a metaphysical explanation so swiftly, is because, and this is something I even discussed with Osman, that there may be a process, or there may be something in addition to natural selection that could have co-acted with natural selection to help the transfer, the transition rate from Pachycetus to the whale in that short span of time. We just don't know. We just may not know the physics involved or the biology involved, but it's scientifically plausible to resort to. So, and this is where I think, for me, that resorting to a current gap, regardless of how inconceivable it is, resorting to a current gap to jump straight to an intelligent designer is a bit problematic for me. And this is where I feel that a metaphysical position is being equated to a scientific one. I think that is incorrect. And that's why I fundamentally believe ID is a God of the gaps argument. It is fundamentally a God of the gaps argument for examples like these.
Oh, yeah. And there's something else that just came to mind about this as well. I literally just lost it. There's something I was just about to say.
Irreducible complexity?
No. Basically, I was agreeing with you with everything you're saying, and I just wanted to add to your point. And there was something I had in mind, and it just just went away.
Your thesis, adoptionism.
No. It wasn't. What was it again? Something about methodological. But anyway, carry on. I
Yeah,
had some.
and
We'll come
so,
back to me.
so that's it for me, right? And like, for example, even Behe's irreducible complexity, right? So the idea that the flagellum seems very complex as it is because it's many parts that need to come together. Fair enough. I don't disagree with that. That it looks designed, it has intelligibility, what have you, etc. But it still does not negate that each of those components could have evolved in certain pathways, evolutionary pathways, for different functions, and then could have come together to have arrived at the flagellum, for instance, right? Scientifically, it is still conceivable. Do we know that, Ned? No, not necessarily. We don't have the complete data set. But to say, aha, flagellum designer, this is, it's such a sweeping move, in my opinion, that, like I said, it equates metaphysics for science, and that should not be happening.
So I just remembered the point, alhamdulillah, and I think the point is very important. The point basically only adds to your argument here. And the point is this. When you basically go and put an argument forward, right? You're not just putting forward an argument. You're actually putting out yourself for a counterattack. It's the same way you reach out your arm, right? You open
and you
up
leave your,
So when we're debating against these atheists, right, in a formal debate, a lot of people afterwards say, why didn't you use this argument? And the reason is because you don't want to use an argument where there's a risk where you could be shown to be wrong. You have to use the strongest argument. And if there's an argument which is like 60% may work or may not work, right, you don't take that risk. Likewise, if you basically jump in there and you basically say, aha, what it is now provisional methodological naturalism, because we're applying it. Let's stop now. This Pachysaurus leading to this.
You made the same mistake as me. So it's not Pachysaurus, it's Pachycetus. I thought it was a dinosaur as well.
sorry, there's this guy who's making fun of Pachysaurus online. So just it's actually a British comedian. So
you know the Islam and Evolution Conference. So in the whole lecture, I sometimes said Pachysaurus. Not really, it's Pachycetus.
I think Pachycetus. We're watching the same program. So anyway, so I am an ID proponent, and I jump in there and I basically say, guys, that's it. This is ID. Few years later, we discover something, and I used an argument which is wrong, and I've lost credibility now. This is why also in the dawah, there are good arguments for Islam, and there's some arguments which are good, but you can see some counters in them. And when you put together 5 arguments and 2 of them look weak or they have a counter, all of them look bad. So it's best to use 3 arguments which are strong or 1 argument that's strong. So I can see this backfiring. And look, it's kind of like this. If you start off and you say we're intrinsic methodological naturalists, atheists can't really attack us. However, if you say we're provisional methodological naturalists, then number one, there's a pressure on you eventually to say, stop guys, now it's time for ID. 2, there's a chance that when you do say that, you could be wrong. So it seems a lot safer to just say
I would agree with that. I definitely agree with that. I think so. I think this is kind of like digressing a little bit from the topic, but you know the contingency argument. Even Muhammad Hijab, he uses the contingency argument, right? So think about it from this point of view, right? God, in His all-powerful nature, He can create worlds that are even more designed than the one we're in. It's possible. By contrast, it is also possible for him to make a totally chaotic world, right? Totally chaotic, absolutely chaos, right? He can do that. It's in His power, right? Now, so if we look at then all the possible worlds that God can create, the design is not a necessary feature in all of them. Do you see my point? Design is not a necessary feature in all of them. That means there needs to be something much more fundamental that grounds God's existence in all of these, and that is that they're contingent. All of these are contingent. Now, those contingencies could be designed or could not be designed. So design, as a philosophical concept, is more of a secondary consideration. Do you see my point? So
I see your point, but we also just need to acknowledge that if you use a really liberal definition of design, then all of those worlds, including the chaotic ones, would be designed. But I get your point.
If you use a liberal one,
So I get your point. If you mean designed perfectly for life, and I understand from that point.
No, by design, in this case, I mean simply being able to do science. So God can create. create amazing worlds with more scientific natural laws that we can even cover versus complete chaos, no science possible whatsoever.
You know, my brain is always in this debate mode. So it always comes up with just stupid things sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
Like literally, you know, a lot of discussions about semantics sometimes. What do you mean by this? Yeah?
Yeah. I agree with that.
We have to be careful about these things. So we have a few minutes left. Well, less than that, about a minute. So what I want to do is I want to firstly apologize to everyone, because every day that we go live, we usually take questions. Today's topic was so intense, we lost track of time. We just went off track. Not that we didn't speak about the topic, but we didn't engage, right? So we're going to bring Shoaib again next Friday. I think would be okay for him. I think
I think Fridays are a good day for me.
Friday is good. We'll carry on with this, but this time we'll take your questions, because there's a lot of people writing questions, and I couldn't actually take those questions. Funnily enough, we actually had a lot of atheists today. You seem to have attracted a certain crowd.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think on some points which we've discussed, we might be able to shake hands on a few principles, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's kind of funny. Today I noticed there's a lot of atheists. Previously, they were not in the other sessions. And when Asadullah Ali came, oh my God, they just came out of everywhere, because obviously he all the time debating them online and stuff. Is there anything lastly, just to summarize, that you didn't say you wanted to say about methodological naturalism or intrinsic or provisional or whatever?
So I think just to kind of wrap it up and summarize everything, right? So we kind of compared philosophical naturalism with methodological naturalism. I think philosophical naturalism is something that maybe Muslims won't be able to accept. Methodological naturalism has two subdivisions. So we have intrinsic and provisional. I personally am of the opinion that intrinsic is the way to go forward, but there are completely valid opinions held by other people who may not agree with me. So I want to make sure that people understand that I'm not saying this is the stance. I believe this is the most correct stance for me personally, and I've given my reasons for that. But there are people who would disagree with me, and that's their prerogative to do that. So I hope that kind of gives you an overview in terms of the conversation. And you can see it took us an hour to kind of really go through and untangle and unpack some of these ideas. Sorry?
We didn't
So even on the whole intrinsic and provisional, bro, there's a really long paper. I think it's about 40 pages that kind of goes into every single detail that for me, I struggled with it. And this was when I was trying to understand what were the various different. So they thought very well about the argument, but I'm writing a paper from an Islamic point of view in how Muslims should best adopt intrinsic methodological naturalism, according even to theological principles and philosophical principles. That is my own and personal position. So that's the kind of summary that I wanted to kind of convey. But I'm more than happy to kind of take questions next week, inshallah.
Yeah. And in terms of my mind, I'm still agnostic about it.
Yeah,
because,
fair enough.
I started off on a very strong, I didn't know the distinction between intrinsic and provisional methodological naturalism, but what I understood of methodological naturalism, it was the intrinsic. So that's what I was really strong on for different reasons. And now there's additional reasons why it's still good. I still have some doubts about, psychologically the way it leads. But then again, there's no solution on the other end that also doesn't have negative sociological impact.
Yeah. So this would be on that point, that would be my question. So if you negate methodological naturalism, fair enough. I would entertain that. But then tell me, what is the alternative? I would leave that question out there. What is the alternative? And if you can tell me an alternative that would make the scientific community, both theistic scientific community and the atheistic scientific community, I'd be willing to entertain that. But I haven't seen a valid alternative so far, and I'm currently investigating into this. So just to kind of leave off for those who are interested in reading, check out Plantinga's Augustinian Science, and then also read Sayyid Hossein Nasr's Theistic Science. So they both kind of agree that methodological naturalism is not the way to go forward, interestingly, but they have a slightly different reasons. Sayyid Hossein Nasr is, I think, the first guy who's given a proper account of theistic science from the Islamic perspective, and Plantinga from the Christian perspective. So I recommend checking out their works.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair for coming on the show. Inshallah, we're going to have you next Friday. May Allah bless you and your family, and thank you for giving us your time. Assalamu alaikum.
Bye-bye.